Our next guest is Assistant Director at Play Australia and loves helping people discover the value and power of play. He has spent most of his career in the health promotion and sports industries, is a children's book author and illustrator, and his favourite pastime is, of course, playing at home with his 3 kids. Today we're talking about the 100 Play Streets movement, overcoming the stigma of children playing in the street, and the practical steps in supporting a healthy childhood. A big warm welcome to the studio, Kieran Brophy.
Thanks, Lucas. Really appreciate you having me on the podcast today. It's great to be here.
No problem at all. We love playmakers like yourself, so I'm really looking forward to the chat, and I think it's a great opportunity to destigmatise the modern play approach of trying to get children in the street again. Some people were thinking, why are they even worried about that? Some people are like, no chance. It's a very polarising topic.
We found that. Absolutely, we found that.
Yeah. First question of the day. You're in Victoria and you're overcoming a lot of challenges with COVID and lockdowns. What is the state of play in Victoria at the moment, as you see it?
Yeah, look, I mean, COVID's just shaken up our world completely, hasn't it? And it's, I guess it's forced us all to sort of look at ourselves. I mean, we've faced some serious lockdowns here in Vic. And look, in a funny way, it's actually been a really good thing for play. I say that, Lucas, because what it's done is it's shaken up the family priorities list, and children haven't been going to structured activities, and they've been given this amazing opportunity to actually play at home and in their communities. And I guess we've embraced this really community-centric way of living, where we live, work and play where we are. And that has real positive ramifications for social connection and providing more opportunities for children. So I'm choosing to look at the silver lining.
Absolutely.
We know that there has been, I guess, some early research around play deprivation and impact on kids as well. And I guess there's a need for us to understand, right, well, which children have been really affected through COVID, and what can we do to really put our hand out and help those children? Because, I mean, I reflect on my own experience, and look, I live in a pretty well-connected street. We know our neighbours. I feel safe to let the kids out and go play. So I've got a 2, 4 and a 6-year-old, Lucas. So I'm very much in that early years pocket. And look, it's been great for us to have that time at home and to see the kids get out and play with the neighbours. But I recognise that our experience is very different from others who've gone through COVID, and particularly those who sort of live in high density living and don't have access to quality spaces to play. So look, lots of learnings there, lots of learnings.
Yeah, 100%. And I can relate. I've got a 6 and 8-year-old. So in the midst of it there as well. Yeah. And when you think about it, it's a hard one, because yes, they have been deprived from their normality, but they've had this extra attention and extra face-to-face time. And we look at the brain research, and the first 1,000 days is determinant of success at 30, and it all comes down to the face-to-face contact with an adult. So in that way, there's real positives, but then in other ways, that change, and I think that emotional contagion of what the parents are bringing and how they're arriving in that relationship with their child is such a variable.
It is, and I do reflect that COVID has placed pressure on the family dynamic, and so I mean, if you've got a really cohesive family dynamic, then that's not an issue. But those that might really struggle in that space, and look, I guess, and I'll say blokes in particular, who have office jobs to go to in the city and don't spend as much time at home. I think many of them have their identities have been challenged to a certain extent, and it's meant that they've sort of had to, I guess, redefine who they are within the family dynamic, and so that can either be a really positive thing, or it can be either a really stressful thing for some couples and families. So yeah, look, it's again, it's been a mixed experience for all.
Yeah, absolutely. And the more people you talk to, there's such diversity, it's such a big spectrum of experiences. Let's shift back a bit, and I have to consider, as we're talking off air, I was recently in the States, and I had a few people ask me directly, it's like, when you mention organisations, can you please tell us what they are? Because we don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. So for our listeners in the States, Play Australia, give us a breakdown and where they can find you guys.
Yeah, so Play Australia, interesting background. So I was part of developing up our current strategy. So this was about 2 years ago, and we dived into the history of Play Australia, and we've actually been around for 107 years, if you can believe it, Lucas. So we were born in Victoria, and we were born in the back streets of Fitzroy, and we were known as the Guild of Play back in the day. And the job of the organisation was to get children off the dirty streets of Fitzroy and into these new spaces called playgrounds. And we had, in time, we had play workers who taught children how to go on swings and how to go down these things called slides. And then we sort of developed up this relationship with the professional industry, and particularly the playground industry, so those that develop spaces. And we've supported the conversation around risk standards and risk benefit for children. And so what we do, and we morphed into Play Australia, I guess over a number of years, and we embraced the national approach in 2010, so about 12 years ago. But I guess there's two parts to our organisation. One part is professional support for those that develop play spaces and those that care about play, like our early years networks. And then the other half of what we do as the peak national advocacy organisation for play is to look at our campaigns and look at how we can build the value of play publicly and support all Australians to play. And I guess that's been a big part of my role over the last 3 years, because that's the amount of time I've been with Play Oz, Lucas. And that's been about developing up our campaigns. And our most progressed campaign is the 1,000 Play Streets campaign. So that's the one that we've sort of been able to unlock a bit of support from government. And as you know, a lot of these things come down to resourcing, and we've been able to actually resource the growth of the movement, which has been a really positive thing.
So getting into the 1,000 Play Streets, if you do the same thing, give us a bit of where did the concept come from, and then how did you roll it out? Because I know there's a lot of listeners that have the advocate's heart for children and play, and I'd just like to. You've been successful in this realm, so if we could just speak into it, give them some encouragement about your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, we've had some small successes to date. We feel like we're at the very start of the journey to grow the Play Streets movement. So 1,000 Play Streets, we've taken inspiration from Playing Out in the UK, and Playing Out in the UK, they've been in operation for over 10 plus years, I think about 12 years. And Alice, who's a co-director at Playing Out, she was living in Bristol about 12 years ago, still lives in Bristol today. And she and the other mums in her local street had young children and got together and said, look, we used to play out when we were kids, and it's not happening now. And look, let's work together so we can support our children to get out and connect with neighbours and play, because we know it's a really good thing. It's a really good thing for their health and well-being. It's a really good thing for the broader community as well. And so they got to chatting with Bristol City Council and initiated this amazing movement. And over the last 12 years, they've scaled to over 1,000 plus Playing Out streets. And these are temporary road closures for play around the UK. And they've had some big wins in terms of supporting the conversation at national levels. So their National Transport Roads Group have turned around and said, look, street play is a really good thing. And that's happened through years of advocacy. And that's a big thing to happen. And they've also seen wins at a local government level. So, for example, Bristol City Council in trying to cut the red tape and make it as easy as possible for local community members to participate. They support a 12-month permit process. So you as a local resident can apply to Bristol City Council and you can get your permit, which covers you for 12 months. You can close your street between, whatever it is, 10 to 12 p.m. on a Sunday each month, and away you go, and you don't have to jump through all the red tape every month. So we've seen them do this amazing, create this amazing movement, and we've gotten in touch with them, and we're learning about how we can build a movement here in Australia. And look, we obviously didn't create street play; it's been here for forever and a day, and there's lots of organisations supporting play on streets. And over the last sort of 6 or 7 years here in Australia, we've seen the Opal Sunday Street Play initiative roll out in South Australia. We've seen Co-Design support play streets here in Victoria, where I am. You've got in City of Vincent, you've got the Ray Street Play Street, which is a couple of mums who've been running their play street for a number of years on a regular basis, which is amazing. And we've got Hyanu, he's doing his work up in Logan around supporting neighbours to connect and play. So I guess it's trying to learn from everyone and trying to say, right, well, how can we actually support a broader conversation around livable streets and get temporary street closures happening here in Oz, being a catalyst to support those informal connections and informal play at the end of the day. So a bit of a long-winded response here, Lucas.
No, not at all.
Hopefully
not at all. I'm going to ask you more questions to increase the wind.
Go.
So when it comes to petitioning and lobbying to get this off the ground, what did that process look like? Yeah, look,
it's interesting. So from a lobbying perspective, you go where the energy is. And I think, play is... It's the ultimate tool to support community health and children's health and well-being. If you look at early intervention, I'm a bit of a health promotion fiend. That's sort of my background. But aware that internationally we've seen really strong physical activity policy that's been embracing play, and I say that in the UK more recently and in New Zealand, we can see those trends. And we've got Sport Australia here, which is, I guess, the peak body for sport in Australia, and they've had a history. They've had a history of trying to support the physical activity conversation, and and at the time, I'm going to say about 3 years ago, they had a CEO by the name of Kate Palmer, who was absolutely fantastic and supported them to develop up a more holistic strategy that looked beyond sport and looked at, well, what other unique partnerships can we look at to support broader physical activity outcomes? And look, we know play is the foundation for physical literacy and to support movement for children across their all life stages. And so I think it was kind of opportune that they were running their funding program, and what we wanted to do aligned. And you've just got to jump on those opportunities when the energy's there. And so we were really fortunate to unlock some funding through Sport Australia to run our pilot. And we piloted play streets with about 6 local governments, one in Queensland, a couple in Vic, one in SA, one in WA. And through the process, we learnt a stack about, I guess, good policy for play and making it easy for local residents. And we were able to build out a heap of planning advice and templates and things that local government can use to support their own play street initiatives. So that's sort of where we're at in the process. Yeah.
And there seems to be a big divide between the perception of sport and physical activity and play and physical activity. So how did you convey that information for the sports orientated or sports motivated people to look at play with a different lens?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think the answer is it's not one or the other. And I think for us to grow physical activity in Australia and physical literacy in Australia, we really need strong federal strategy. We need Department of Health and key organisations like Sport Australia taking a more holistic approach to understand that sport is part of the solution. Sport's part of our culture here in Australia, and it's absolutely fantastic. However, if we're going to support physical activity of all, we need to know that there's only sort of about 15 to 20% of people in Australia who participate in structured sport. And everyone else, well, we actively live. I like gardening myself, Lucas, and we walk and we ride, and a lot of people go to the gym, and we play as well. And so we really need to take that broad brush approach. And Sport Australia, they initiated the physical literacy conversation here with the support of La Trobe University and a number of other tertiary organisations to understand what does physical literacy mean for Australia. And look, physical literacy, when you break it down, it's being able to understand the value of movement. I know how to move. I can move. I'm confident to move. I'm confident to move with others. And when we think about play, that's what play does. Play builds confidence in our children to move, and play supports them to take risks and to try new things. And to fall over and get back up and learn how to roll down hills and climb up trees. And there's just so much benefit to be had by supporting quality play, particularly within those first 5 years. And as you say, I mean, that's where 90% of brain development occurs for our children. So for me, it's a no-brainer that play supports broader physical activity and sport at the end of the day, which is all part of the decision maker's logic.
And physically competent children obviously make better athletes, and it's quite an interesting. My understanding is that participation in sport is steadily dropping as well. So it's kind of that pre-activation and feed into sport, especially with this coming out of a pandemic, where those 4 to 5 to 6 year olds that would traditionally be getting involved in sport, all of a sudden they're 7 and 8, and it's kind of not getting on, but it's that initiation program and the scaffolding of that physical competence in sport may have been missed.
Absolutely. Look, I think COVID's had a really interesting impact on us as a society, and I know we've seen a lot of kids drop out of structured sport, and we've seen sports at club level really struggling to connect and retain volunteers. So sport is working through this new dilemma. How do we stay relevant, and how can we attract more people in? But look, I challenge it. I guess I challenge that thinking, and I sort of say, well, look, can we broaden it, and can we support children and families to move any way they want, and play again. If families want to play and they're moving, let's embrace the unstructured. And a lot of some of the research we've looked at is that children need twice as much unstructured physical activity as structured for their healthy development. So there's a strong case to be made that we need to take play seriously. And unfortunately, at a federal level, we don't. And we need to.
And want to highlight, when we talk about play, we're not talking about a destination. We're not talking about going just to a park. Play's not an event. Play statistically is the biggest contributor to physical activity.
100%.
On the markers, and then sports further down the list.
Absolutely. And there's also other key advocacy groups out there who support active transport, being your walking and cycling. And they need a bigger seat at the table as well, as part of this broader conversation.
Definitely.
So there's a lot of improvement to be made. I mean, we've got our National Preventative Health Strategy, or National Preventative Health Plan here in Oz. And a couple of the key focus areas is one of them's increased physical activity, and the other one's increased mental wellbeing. and play just aligns so well with those focus areas, but it's not reflected enough. And we've recently gone through a change of government, so look, I see opportunity. Lucas, and look, we're trying to push where we can.
Yeah, I'm hoping with the lens of priority and making early childhood services a bit more accessible will shine a bit more of a broader light on things within supporting children of play. I'm optimistic about that. And also optimistic because when you look at 1,000 Play Streets, it's my understanding it's like the first play movement that managed to get some federal-based support, which hasn't been done before. So to see that is quite motivating. To shift it a bit, we touched on it, our perception around, the outdoor country and the sportsmanship. But in contrast to that, when you look at the physical activity data and scale it worldwide, the numbers don't say that we're like the most outdoor nation as well. No. Especially coming back from the States, they're like, you must be outdoors all the time. And you guys are like, well, it's kind of embarrassing, but no, we're not.
No. A lot of work to be done. Well, yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think we've got a real issue with sedentary lifestyles and too much screen time, and we need to embrace the outdoors a lot more, and we need to invest in strategies to support families to make good decisions and to support their children to get out. And I mean, our parents and caregivers, they're the gatekeepers of our children's play, and we need them opening up that door and sending children out, but also supporting them to find spaces for play as well. Yeah. Appreciating that not everyone has a backyard to go out and play in. And what does that mean for those families and those communities who don't have access to adequate space?
What's your thoughts on what's the contributors to us not actually being that outdoorsy? Yeah. Like when you look at the European countries or states in Canada, I think the seasonality is actually a really big motivator to get people outdoors. You get these wonderful summer seasons in the States and you're out on lakes and it's stunning. And then you get winter and you can go skiing and it's it's a real appreciation. But as a culture, I think, and the communities, we're really lacking in that motivation to get outside. So I'd love to get your thoughts on those barriers.
Yeah, look, I mean, we know that the research points to a lot of barriers in terms of parental fear, being a driver to keep children inside and away from harm. So my child might get hurt if they're climbing up a tree, or they might get hit by a car if they're playing on the street, or they might get abducted by a stranger if they're playing in the community. And there's also the social stigma. So we know a lot of parents are fearful that, well, if my neighbours see my child playing out on the street, they might think that I'm a bad parent, and that's a real driver as well. And that's what our parents perceive to be real, and what they perceive to be real has a big bearing on how they behave. So I think there's a lot of work to be done around supporting our parents and caregivers to become more aware about the value of outdoor play. It's a good thing, and also supporting them around the knowledge in terms of, right, well, you have a real role to play here. And when we talk about providing children freedom, time and space for outdoor play every day for their healthy development, this is your role in that process. You're the one who needs to open up the gate and find time in the day, in your busy day, and find spaces for children to play, and break down that idea of, well, what does actually freedom mean, and it means allowing children to embrace a bit of risk, because we know risk is so important when it comes to children's play. So a bit of work to be done there.
Yeah, I think there's a common confusion around risk versus hazard a lot of the time as well. Risk being possible to negotiate, and risk is everywhere, and not something to be avoided. What is your strategy to overcome that the danger stigma about children playing in the street. You mentioned you touched on a few of them in your last question, but more specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I did mention before that we see temporary street closures for play being a catalyst. I mean, our policy and our legislative context, it's very different from the UK. And so I talked about playing out before, and they've been able to scale their play streets, and they've seen that these playing out play streets have seen regular participation of their communities. I don't see that happening in the short term here in Australia because of the amount of red tape, because of the legislative, because of the policy context here. It's really difficult to run these things regularly. But if we can use them as a catalyst to connect communities, then all this good stuff falls out of connection. So what we're finding through our Play Streets movement is that parents get out in the street and they connect with other parents and they connect with other adults who don't have children, and all of a sudden they feel like they belong. And all of a sudden they perceive their neighbourhood to be a safer place to be. And this is a real driver of confidence. And we're seeing that parents who participate in these Play Street gatherings leave more confident to support their children to get out and play in future on the streets. And I'm really encouraged to see that in the context of our data, and thanks to La Trobe Uni for supporting us with the data piece. We know research is so important for any kind of growth of this kind of campaign initiative, but we found that non-parents, so adults out there who don't have children, who've come and participated in Play Streets, we've seen a shift in attitudes towards, I'm not sure about this Play Street thing, to actually now I think it's a really good thing. After meeting with the community and seeing children play on the street, I can see the positive benefits for these children and for the community more broadly. So this is good. This is encouraging. And I think if we can build confidence, particularly with our parents, caregivers, this is going to be a driver to positive behaviours.
Yeah, big time. I've seen it firsthand and spoke to parents in Play Streets, the one up in Logan, and it's amazing to see their shift and their honesty in what their perception was pre and post. And there's a great story where one lady's moving out and the whole street's petitioning to be able to find her another rental so they can stay in the Play Street.
How good's that? Like, and I love all the, I guess, unintended outcomes and all the good stories that fall out of simply supporting a space for communities to come together. And we've had some brilliant stories about, I guess, the social capital being created, and neighbours have helped each other with IT issues, and we've seen walking groups kickstart, and we've seen parents not realise that, we've got children who live in our street and they go to the same school. If you can believe it, I can't get over that. And now all of a sudden they're connecting and playing on a regular basis. It's it's beautiful. It is. Yeah,
I can relate. I didn't know, like, it's not a quiet street. It's kind of like at the bottom of a hill before you go up, and it's on a corner. But the children on the diagonal across the street, two young boys. When we first moved in, I didn't know kids lived there for months.
Yeah, right.
So I just never heard them and never saw them. And
it's that automatic it's the automatic garage door where they just drive straight in the house and you never see them.
100%. 100%.
It's kind of amazing. But we ran a Play Street here in my street, and I live in a court. And look, like I said before, Lucas, it's a court of about 8 houses, and I know everyone pretty well. Because I just like to poke my nose into people's business and know who's living in our court. But when we first moved in, there was I've got an older lady who sort of lives diagonally away from us, and she came up to me when we first moved in. This was about 5 years ago, and sort of said, "Look, just to let you know, I don't like people parking in front of my house. So just don't do it, and tell your visitors not to park there either." And I sort of walked away thinking, maybe she's not that interested in connecting with me and my family, and that's all right. And, it happens, and we'll just, life goes on. And anyway, I'd assumed that she wasn't interested in the Play Street that we organised. And look, I went around and did a bit of a letter drop and a door knock to let everyone know that this was happening. And as it turns out, she loved the idea and came out and started talking about how marvellous it was that children were playing on the street. And we've got a totally different relationship now. And it's just that was the unintended consequence for me. I mean, I thought I knew which neighbours were going to come and participate, and I had it locked down. My assumption, I had it completely wrong. And it's been a really good thing for the street.
I find play and social interactions within play and bringing families together really creates those positive learning. That's like the community to raise a child type of vibe is presented in those situations.
Absolutely. I've got another. It's a cool story, and it's about one of the Play Street gatherings we had in South Australia. I'll say for a more disadvantaged community. There was a mum there, Tikawita, with a Samoan background, and she had lived in this particular street and felt quite socially isolated. So new mum with new bub and walked around her street and didn't know many of her neighbours and didn't have much social interaction. And when the local government supported the Play Street in her street, she had a really good time of it. And it was interesting. We went and had a cup of tea with her at her place, and she said what drew her to the Play Street was the cultural piece. So she sort of said, look, back in Samoa, in the community that she lived in, everyone knew everyone's business, and everyone shared things as well. And it was really about social connection and quality connections, and everyone helped each other. And she actually moved out of her community and moved to New Zealand, and then moved across to Australia in time. And she learnt that our culture was quite different, in that she was told from a very young age not to share. And she told me a story of how she was part of her netball team, and she was standing around and drinking a Coke, and she went to pass the Coke around the circle and didn't even think twice about it. Passed her can of soft drink around the circle of girls who were in the team, and the coach came over and tapped her on the shoulder and said, "Look, what you're doing here is not to be done. You're spreading germs. We don't like that, so don't pass your drinks around." And she said that was a real defining moment. And she sort of said, "Look, from then on, I understood that I was in a different culture, and we just don't share." And so her experience of Play Streets, it was a really positive one, and it was an eye opener, and it got her connecting with her local community again, and it reminded her of her home in Samoa, and as a result, now when she walks down the street, people stop her and say hello, and it's just another beautiful story there, Lucas. So I'm going off on a tangent.
No, not at all. They're the ones that are important as the data, I feel. Yeah. Because it's evidence of that heart piece, which moves beyond and transcends what we know in our mind to be true, but then that transfers it to our hearts to be like, oh, that's reaffirming that I know this as truth.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
When it comes to those barriers, and you look at a lot of red tape, like the UK compared to here, the States to here, Finland to here, how have you overcome that? Because that seems to be a real problem and sticking point, because it's all good, and especially with different states, different rules, different councils. And there's 1,000, the number's 1,000. You got to come up with some strategy. I'd love to know about it.
Absolutely. So, look, at a local government level, and we see our role as really boosting capability of local government to support Play Street, community-led Play Streets. We know that a couple of the biggest blockers are resourcing. So the community development team within that local government having enough people and dollars to actually do productive stuff. And culture is a big barrier, I suppose, or it can be an enabler. So we need really strong support from leadership to say, look, this is a worthy intervention of our time, and also when I talk about culture, it's about being progressive with risk, and saying that yes, we are supporting our communities to get out in the streets, and our policy is going to be a human-centred, policy-driven, as opposed to compliance-driven policy. So we need to see those conversations happening within local government to make headway. But in addition to that, Lucas, you've got things like public liability to work through. You've got things like traffic management and traffic control, and also broader risk management planning as well. And in every state, it looks a little bit different because for our international listeners, we're overgoverned. We have three different levels of government, and our states have different legislation around use of roads. But our councils control our smaller roads, so it's a bit convoluted. But we're working through it, and we're trying to understand what the issues are within each state, and to provide good advice around working around those issues.
Yeah, just what comes to mind there is like risk, liability, that then leads to the perception of risk. When we talk about risk from a government standpoint, they think liability.
Yeah, 100%.
But when lay people talk about risk, we think more along the lines of opportunity. So how do you bridge that gap, or what's the language you use to try to support people to change their assumptions of risk being more based in opportunity?
Yeah. So look, just on the public liability stuff, playing out in the UK, they support or at a local government level, they support their communities to sign a public liability waiver, which is interesting. It's an interesting way to go, which basically says, right, well, you're the parent or you're the caregiver, grandparent, and you're going to be responsible for your child when they're on the street, and you won't sue us if something happens. And this is a really logical way to go. We don't support public liability waivers here in Australia. And so what we say is that local government, you need to sort out the public liability. You can't push it onto your local resident and say you need to take out your own cover for your street, because it's not going to work. It's not going to work. But look, coming back to your question, Lucas, and it was about, I guess, how we support, is it local government to think about risk benefit? Is that? Yeah,
or just those people that, the powers that be, local government, the councillors, even the school, when someone's advocating for their child's right to be a child.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think it's about bringing the data to the forefront. And we've been really cognizant to have a strong relationship with Centre for Sport and Social Impact at La Trobe University, so we can, in the context of our planning advice and what we offer local government, we're building this body of research that says, right, play streets is a really good thing. It's a good thing for physical activity and health and well-being of children, and social connection, and broader community health. And so the more we can push those messages up the line and get those messages to the key decision makers, i.e. CEO at local government level, that the more chance we have of local government taking a progressive approach to human-centred policy as opposed to compliance-driven.
Also, where did you land on the public liability? I know the UK do waivers. Yeah. Where did you land with that in Australia?
So at the moment, every local government that participates in play streets that needs to go out and get public liability, or they feel they need to get covered. So our message is, you need to take care of that. You need to take care of that. And if you're not going to take care of it, and you're going to try and push it on your community member or your local resident, then the model won't work. The model won't work. So, and in terms of how they take care of it, it can vary. It might be that they go out and take out separate cover to support a number of communities over the course of 12 months, or it might be that local government attend that gathering and their public liability extends to that gathering. I mean, it's a bit grey, and it varies.
But why don't they accept the waiver?
Look, I think we have. I guess we have a bit of a compliance-driven culture, and there's a bit of fear there about
nanny.
Yeah, a bit of a nanny state. I'm going to get sued. So so it's there's just not that risk appetite, and we've got to keep mounting the argument that this is about benefit for children. This is about benefit for communities, and risk shouldn't be frowned on. And like you said, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity if we embrace it. Amazing things can happen.
Absolutely. People actually take responsibility for their own safety when that happens. It's remarkable when you give people agency to look after themselves.
100%, Lucas. And we're finding that, like in terms of the communities that get involved, we're learning a bit more about the different kinds of communities that participate in play streets. And look, at the far end of the spectrum, you've got communities who are already connected, who can actually self-organise and go out and do it. Now, local government doesn't want to hear from them. They just want them to go out and play, because as soon as they contact local government and say, look, can you help me with a temporary street closure, all of a sudden it becomes a lot more difficult for them to participate in play streets. That's not who 1,000 Play Streets is for. And so if you look down the spectrum in that sort of mid-level, you've got community members who might have some capacity, but may not be connected. And what we saw is through one of the pilots, it was City of South Perth. We ran a pilot in a greenfields estate it was a new development that had been up and happening for about 3 or 4 years. And so there was a lot of new families there who hadn't connected. And what they found is that by connecting through the local government supported play street, a lot of those families went away and continued to connect and play on the street after the fact. So what we've seen is that community sort of moved up the spectrum and they become more self-sustaining. Yeah. But we've also got to realise that there's a bunch of other communities out there at the other end, and these are our communities who arguably need play streets the most, and often live in our most disadvantaged areas, and don't have the capacity or connection to approach local government and get this thing happening. So there's an equity piece here, and so what we need to see is local governments understanding that, right, well, some communities need more help than others to get involved, and it's going to be a bit more of a burden in terms of resourcing, time and effort to help them. But the yields and the impacts that we see from connecting with these communities, it can be amazing.
Drastically more.
And
the risk reward.
Absolutely. And those communities aren't going to spring right up to the other end of the spectrum. No. It's going to be a slowly approach, and it needs to be developed with community. And it might mean that, you do run a play street once a year or once every 6 months to keep that community connected and keep the conversation going.
Yeah, and what I hear there is that stigma just springs to mind around those communities. The higher risk areas are assumed to have higher risk for play, when it's actually contradictory, because the more play you have outside, the safer the streets get.
Absolutely, 100%. It's about connecting people across all communities, and again, health and well-being spills out of connection. Yeah,
and children are aware of it as well. We did at the Childhood Summit that was hosted by the Australian Institute of Play based in Logan. We did the Playable Cities framework with a bunch of primary school children from there. We mapped out their neighbourhood and had it mapped out, and they could tell me the streets they didn't like to go down when they drove, the reasons why, and they could articulate their whole neighbourhood through and where they would play and where they wouldn't play, and the changes they would make.
Amazing.
And what other people think of their area.
That's sensational, and I think you've highlighted what's really important here. It's about supporting that very local conversation at the street level, so families and children can come together, and neighbours more broadly, and actually define what their play street looks like, and where do we want it to be, how do we want it to run, and I guess that's the beauty of the model. It comes down to community. Yeah.
For you to deem the 1,000 Play Streets movement a success, what would the metric have to be?
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously from a campaign standpoint, we've said, look, we'd love to achieve 1,000 play streets by June 2025 to align with our broader Play Australia strategy. I'm much more interested in the broader conversation around livable streets and where this goes. Look, we're talking about the use of temporary street closures to support play, but also because we're talking about play streets, we're finding that we're having all these other interesting conversations with different organisations about space for play more broadly, space within communities, about establishing roaming ranges of children. And if we think about the street as the first step away from the home, we're trying to connect, and what's the next step out from that, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, let's give a bit of a definition there for our listeners that might not be familiar. Roaming range.
Yeah. So we know from a generational standpoint, years ago, our parents and grandparents, they had a lot more freedom to move independently around their communities. And these days, within the culture that we live in here in Australia, children are lucky to walk to the end of their street and back without being supervised by a parent or caregiver. So there's a lot of work to be done there. And we know that independent roaming of children around communities, well, that's an indicator for really positive health in terms of those children themselves and in terms of the broader community. So to see children playing independently at the local park, that's a really good thing. It's but we also we balance that with understanding that contexts have changed and density of living has changed. More cars have been introduced to streets, and so some streets that children played on 20, 30 years ago may not be appropriate for children to play on them today. And so we're just calling for a lot of common sense here. How can we support the independent movement of children and support their safety as well? So it's a balanced conversation.
Yeah, and it's kind of within health, and because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a preventative approach here, not a reactive one. So
that's right.
It's a harder sell because we kind of want to see the bleeding before we act. Look, so how do you pitch a preventative model when people really naturally aren't accustomed to acting on it? Yeah. So I think, there's a bank of evidence and data out there that says this is a good thing. How do we take all that data and translate to our parents and caregivers to build confidence and to support them to enable to feel empowered to open up that gate and allow their children to roam? And it's a really personal question because every family lives within a different context. Every child's ready at different stages, and look, it's I think we talk about play more broadly, and we talk about the importance of children playing their way and developing in time and doing things when they're ready. And so I think that conversation will naturally come. But it is an interesting one, Lucas, because I said before, I'm a parent of a 2, 4, and a 6-year-old, and the idea that I just leave them up the park and wander off, I'm not there yet. No. So this is I'm interested to see how I'm going to go personally to support the independent roaming of my children. And it is a hard one. It's a natural response to want to protect our children. But I think the biggest disservice we could do to our children to give them the impression that we're always going to be there to protect them.
100%.
It's not good for mental health.
My job, I see my job pretty clear cut as a parent, and my job is to encourage independence so my children ultimately don't need me. I hope that they want to hang out with me, but I hope in time they're going to turn around and say, "Yep, we got this covered, Dad. Take a seat."
100%. And a question that I'd like to wrap with today. What of the children themselves? Because I love the work, doing work with the children's voice, and
Yes.
It's such gold. So, what are the children telling you about the play streets they've been engaged with, and also the children that don't have access to a play street?
Yeah. So I guess through our data accumulation, we've sort of been chatting with parents and non-parents and kids as well, and ultimately we know the benefits of play. We talk about the importance of play, developing our children physically, emotionally, cognitively, socially. But really, what we're finding that the children who participate in play streets, they just want to get out there because it's fun, and they get to hang out with their neighbours, and they get to do whatever they want to do in their own time. And really, it's been interesting to see who takes back the streets at a community level. And the play streets that I've been on, it's been the children who have been driving the activity on the streets and dragging mum and dad and grandma and grandpa out on the street. And it's just been beautiful to see. So I think, we want to play. We want to play. Let us play. And we've got a real responsibility to open up that gate and support freedom, time and space for our children to play.
100%. Anyone, the caretakers, if you will, of childhood, anyone that knows a child or anyone that's been a child has a responsibility to fulfill that unique and essential right to be a child.
Absolutely.
So for our listeners, 1,000 Play Streets, where can they find you? playaustralia.org.au. We've got a bundle of Play Streets information on our website, and we're constantly adding to it. But please jump on and get in touch if you have questions. We'd love to hear from you. And also, where are you looking for inspiration to find your motivation in doing it? And maybe we can steer the listeners in a direction where the stuff you're looking at that inspires you, that's actually beyond your program, but feeds into it.
Yeah, so in terms of why am I motivated to do what I do?
Yeah, or what other projects you're looking at, or people you're following, or anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, from a real personal perspective, my motivation comes from my family, from being a dad and having 3 children, and understanding that to give them the best start in life, play is really important. And we've got the research, but it's that personal connection that's really important to me. And look, it's how I experience my children. The relationships I have with them, they're developed through play, through being a bit of a silly dad at times, as we all are. But there's just it's just wonderful for the whole family. But in terms of the broader work that we're looking at for Play Australia, we're working on 1,000 Play Streets. We're working on Playground Finder as well. So that's a website and app to support families to find places to play. We're building more PD for early years in our professional networks. And so we encourage people to check out that. And we're in the process of developing up our Play Today campaign, which sits across everything, which is that broader call to action to say, right, make time today for outside play. And that'll be rolling out in the next 3 months or so, Lucas. So we're really hopeful to get our bundle together and get that out the door to support that national conversation even further. So yes, professional networks, but also a bigger conversation with parents and caregivers around building that confidence to open up that gate.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for being such a great, authentic playmaker and encouraging a positive state of play, not just where you are in Victoria, but all the way across Australia with the 1,000 Play Streets. We'll put all of the links in the show notes of the sites you just mentioned. So I'd encourage everyone, jump on board. Play Australia website.org there's a bunch of free resources on there.
.org.au.
.org.au. No, that's cool.
Yes.
But there's heaps of resources on there for the people involved in the play industry. Please become a member and become a part of participating in that advocacy for authentic play. Thank you so much, Kieran. Keep up the amazing work.
Thanks, Lucas. Appreciate it.